Hi guys, I'm Mike.
And I'm Stephen.
And this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to the channel, and after being hijacked the last couple of days by Moto Meerkat joining in things, it is just me and Stephen for you today for your race review podcast. It is the place where we round up and kind of review each team's weekend from the race. We also have a feeder review in and give our driver of the day and race rating as a kind of complete package to round up our kind of coverage of the F1 70 Grand Prix, as well as obviously from a fantasy perspective tomorrow. But, you know, I hope you're excited for it. It was a good race.
It was a very solid race.
It was. Great race. Wasn't the best of the season. Austria still stands out, I think, for excitement, unpredictability, and just a bit of everything.
Yeah.
It goes from there. But this was the first, I think, proper race we had a fight for the lead.
Yeah,
and
100%.
Maybe not on track, but strategy cool and two different teams fighting at the top. It was fantastic to see, and obviously we'll get round to that. You'll know by now that obviously Max Verstappen has won the 70th anniversary GP, and obviously, yeah, we'll be talking about the Red Bull Mercedes guys last up in the video, so make sure you kind of hang around for that. But we start off with Williams. And Williams weekend, after obviously finishing 12th and 15th last weekend, struggled on the softer compounds. And George got into Q2 again. It's becoming a regular occurrence for him, which is fantastic. On that front, but that was probably about when the highlights ended for Williams.
Yeah, it wasn't much more. I think they are one of a few teams actually to look good at Silverstone Grand Prix, not so good at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, even though they were the same track. Just that different tyre compound, slightly hotter conditions. Some teams really struggled out there compared to last week.
I think that's a good point, actually. Away from Williams slightly, obviously finishing 18th and 19th, George Russell again out-qualifying his teammate and doing there. It is tough for Latifi, but Russell just keeps up this consistent level of performance in terms of beating his teammates. But, yeah, it just was... the race pace just isn't there at the moment, but hopefully in Spain it might be. I don't know whether it's a temperature thing. Again, with Mercedes engines don't compete as well, but then Racing Point, the other Mercedes engine on the grid, they were fine.
Very good. Yeah.
So, yeah, not too sure on that. But yeah, a point before we go on to Alfa Romeo, in terms of obviously a lot of people's fears were with these back-to-back Grand Prix. It's just going to be a carbon copy. It's going to be boring unless you do something different. Well, both Austria and Styria were quite different.
Yeah.
and Silverstone and the 70th anniversary GP were different. So, yeah, look, as soon as lights goes out in Formula 1, there's an unpredictable element to it. And, you know, that's certainly something interesting that kind of, it brings that excitement. There is such an unpredictability to F1 because they're machines. And at the end of the day, machines being driven by drivers, there can be mistakes, there can be, you know, different circumstances, weather's there, temperature. We don't really tend to get like the same race twice, do we?
Exactly. Every race is different.
But Alfa Romeo.
Alfa Romeo. Actually a decent result for Kimi Räikkönen in P15. I keep thinking he did better. P15 though, still beat both the Williams. After being the back marker of last week, sitting at the back of the grid, he did okay. Obviously, he beat his teammate Giovinazzi, which he probably should, but you know, Giovinazzi's been putting in some very good performances. But still not competitive whatsoever, I think it's fair to say. So, positive race pace-wise, they were better, but better than terrible is still terrible.
Yeah, it's nothing to kind of shout home about. And obviously, Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams look in their own little bracket at the moment.
Yeah.
Haas are struggling for consistency of performance, whether that's through mechanical faults or through incidents during the race, whether that be driver inflicted or non-driver inflicted. So to beat, well, for Raikkonen to be at the top of that is a positive for Alfa Romeo, but like I said, it's just terrible in terms of it's just an awful car and it can't be fun at all. I mean, Kimi is literally in every interview just basically going, we're slow.
Yeah.
And hating life, basically. But Haas, well, we'll get Grosjean out the way. Qualified well on Saturday, I thought. You know, in a season where it's been tough, it's been easy to criticise Grosjean, and in performances that, you know, it's a real struggle with things. Saturday was actually a very good performance from him, I think, to get that Haas into Q2. I think, I still haven't looked it up, should have done. I'm not sure whether that's their first time they've got into Q2 this season, but it certainly feels like it's the first one for a while.
I feel like Kevin Magnussen got into Q2 this season.
He might have done in terms of like the first Grand Prix. But yeah, it was a solid performance for Romain Grosjean. But, you know, that's probably where the highlights ended.
Yep.
Race pace wasn't there. Finished P16, didn't really have any pace. Magnussen had a brilliant start, but then dropped off, was fighting Latifi, went wide at Stowe, went to come back on the track aggressively. And, you know, that is when, obviously, you know, Magnussen comes into criticism in terms of whether he crosses that line between racing hard or being, you know, over that line. And yes, well, 2 days ago, Sunday, was one of those days where he stepped over the line, you know, and was fairly given a 5-second penalty for. May have come from frustration because the team said, I don't know why they didn't figure it out in the week's break. Maybe they couldn't. Obviously, they're a team that operate on a budget. But apparently they thought the car still had some floor damage that affected performance after, you know, Albon's collision with Kevin Magnussen the previous week. So maybe that frustrated, and we all seen kind of drivers get frustrated in the cockpit, make decisions. But yeah, wasn't a great weekend for Haas.
No. Moving on to, shall we go AlphaTauri next?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's stop by AlphaTauri. Pierre Gasly's been convincingly beating Kvyat this season. I think it's fair to say, other than the retirements he's had on qualifying and race, he's looking the better of the pair. But had a bit of a mare this week. Similar, you know, we mentioned Williams went from good weekend to bad weekend. Gasly was a bit like that. I presume he pushed too hard on his, what was it, his second stint.
On the hard tyre.
Yeah, completely ruined them, and that was basically his race. He then struggled at the back. He recovered to P11, but when you qualify P7, finishing P11 is a bad day at the office. Kvyat, though, qualifying P16, manages to just grab a point for AlphaTauri in P10. Not a bad day at all for him.
No, it wasn't. I thought I was impressed by Kvyat. And yeah, Gasly was a weird one because, you know, out-qualified the Red Bull. He came out after the first pit stop, even pitting beforehand, keeping his... well, Albon pitted earlier, but he was able to stay out longer and keep his advantage over Albon. But then Norris stayed out longer and managed to jump Gasly.
Yeah.
And then it just seemed to go down, further down, and recovering to 11th was decent in the end, all things considered. But yeah, I mean, the only guys he finished in head of were Vettel, who spun at the start, Carlos Sainz, who had a horrible race, and I think Daniel Ricciardo was P14, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Who also had a spin. So finished only ahead of guys on mistakes, and I suppose the tyres was the lesser of the mistakes, shall we say. But Kvyat, you know, he needs positive weekends. I think he's been unlucky in terms of starts. His qualifying hasn't been great on a Saturday. It hasn't quite got together. which has put him so far behind Gasly. Because I would actually say that in the races, they've been pretty similar in terms of pace. But Kvyat's been that far back that obviously Gasly takes advantage of it. And it's maybe difficult. We obviously said Alfa Tauri seem to be in a league of their own, but maybe they are closer to the midfield pack than we give them credit for.
The car looks like it's improving every race. So yeah, positives to take away from Alfa Tauri, but only the point where they may have thought they should have had a couple more.
Certainly. So we move on to Renault. And Ricciardo being one of the standout drivers of last weekend in the Silverstone Grand Prix, and struggled this weekend. Had a spin after a pit stop stint with Carlos Sainz looking to make a move, and then spun out by being just a little bit too aggressive, getting on the throttle too much too soon and spinning round, and that cost him his race and finishing P14. And it was a shame for Renault, because there was a chance probably to get some serious traction over their rivals in McLaren, because I would have imagined if he hadn't, he would have finished P8, P9 with Ocon.
He could have finished much higher. It's obviously time management, one of Daniel Ricciardo's big things.
And to go later on in the race, and the spin, just cost that. But Esteban Ocon, on the other hand, again, we say this every week, which is a positive sign, I think, with Ocon, in that was his best race to date. You know, he finished, he started P14 after getting the 3-place grid penalty for blocking George Russell in qualifying. A fair penalty, and there wasn't any fight from Renault or Ocon on that front. The team kind of let him down by not really communicating to him that Russell was coming. But, you know, he's started P14 below, you know, a load of those guys, and he's finished ahead of everyone.
Yeah.
Out of, you know, the McLarens, his teammate, Sebastian, Carlos, you know, it just, he's had a fantastic race and a really good weekend, and I think 8th is as good as what Renault could have got, because the Racing Point seemed better on pace this weekend, didn't they? And Charles Leclerc is just performing on an incredible level in that Ferrari.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a positive weekend for Ocon, but an opportunity missed by Renault, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. McLaren, there's a lot of opportunities missed. McLaren, another team that had a very good, Sainz obviously suffered late on last week, but they were looking best of the rest last week, although Ricciardo was making a late charge. But this week, race pace was just not there.
No.
Sainz finished comfortably out of the points, and Norris only grabbed 9th. So Norris went into the race thinking it was going to be a struggle. So I struggled in the heat. They're obviously no Mercedes engine. Struggled with the softer tyres. I don't know.
They've got a Renault engine.
Yeah, exactly. They haven't got a Mercedes engine.
No, so maybe it wasn't it, because they've had cooling issues throughout the season. The Renaults.
It was just a bit confusing. Where we've always thought that their race pace isn't quite there, but it was some way off. I think it's fair to say for the 70th anniversary race.
I don't know whether it's tyres. You know, they had to nurse the tyres more just to get them through stints. I don't know whether it's the chassis is particularly heavy on tyres. I don't know. We haven't really had any sort of deep analysis from Sky and the pundits on, you know, what's up with McLaren's race pace.
Yeah, for the drivers to go into the race knowing the race pace isn't there, it's a bit of a mystery.
But what I would say, actually, for McLaren, and we probably need to talk this, and Ferrari might be looking there. Obviously, Carlos Sainz, after last season, incredibly highly rated. He's done decent at other teams, but nothing spectacular. Last year was definitely his breakthrough year. Even then, he lost his qualifying to Lando Norris, and we know Lando's incredible over one lap pace. That's a real strength of Lando. But it's in the races as well. And I know obviously Carlos would have finished ahead of him last week at Silverstone, and Silverstone is one of Sainz's stronger tracks actually as well. So
that's where the smooth operator was born.
It was.
It wasn't smooth today. Yes, Sunday.
Yeah, it wasn't. And I'm going to put this to you in terms of a question. We use this opportunity to talk about Carlos Sainz a bit. Do you think he's been a disappointment this season?
To be so convincingly beaten by his teammate, it is slightly... Everyone's going, Sainz is regretting going to Ferrari next season, but maybe he's quite lucky to have that Ferrari seat. Maybe McLaren would be starting to look at these performances. Maybe we should be getting Daniel Ricciardo in, obviously if Sainz had the means.
Yeah, that's what I think. Obviously, it's early season. It's too early to kind of draw conclusions. You know, we've got to get to at least, I think, Monza's 8 races, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the technical halfway point of this season. So that'll be a fair reflection. But I know team orders kind of came into play in both of the Austria Grand Prix. But Norris had put himself in that position to benefit from team orders.
The team orders helped Sainz last weekend. If Sainz had finished, they used team orders to hold position, didn't they? Because Lando Norris became the rear gunner for Sainz. So obviously, he's had his team orders to go in his favour as well. It's only been Norris in 1 out of 6 races now.
Yeah, was it Hungary that he beat him?
So it's 5 races.
Yeah, 1 out of 5.
Yeah, Hungary. And that he only finished 10th.
Yeah, so it's not really the Carlos Sainz that we were seeing last season. So that's interesting. And obviously there is an element of it that Lando Norris is the guy they will invest in. Naturally, they'll use Carlos as the data collector rather than the major. But there's still a team at the moment that want to maximise all the points for the constructors.
They're flying for 3rd,
So, it just kind of feels a little bit of a letdown. But we'll see what Carlos Sainz produces. But we move on to now Racing Point. And probably another interesting discussion will come from this one in regards to Lance Stroll. But Nico Hülkenberg actually got to race this weekend after, on the back of an incredible qualifying performance. I think getting P3, beating Max in the Red Bull, which is clearly the second fastest car out there for me. Really, really impressive performance from Nico. Getting that, lost it immediately at the start. Max had a fantastic start, to be fair. He got off the line really well, which didn't help. And I don't know if Hülkenberg had a bad start, but he was immediately under pressure. But Stroll had a fantastic start as well, coming up into P5. And then that's pretty much where they held for the race until Nico Hülkenberg was a little bit too hard on his tyres too early in a stint, which forced him to have a later pit stop, which is, pretty understandable actually in terms of things. He's missed 4 races, but he doesn't really inside that car inside out like Lance Stroll would in the team. So tyre management, and he didn't get the opportunity and benefit of how it's going to work on the race like Lance had last week.
Yeah.
So there, and Lance did probably where it was expected to be, but it didn't look good for Lance Stroll this weekend.
No, I think Silverstone you'll be glad to get out of the way. I know you're going to say Stroll being by Nico for much of the weekend. Is he good enough? Does he deserve the seat? But Silverstone clearly is not one of his favourite tracks. I don't want to look too much into it. I know I've laid into Sainz just now, but that's looking at the whole season so far. 5 races. But Stroll, I don't know.
And a good performance in Hungary. That was very impressive. That was a good performance. Austria week 1 obviously had the engine issues and retired from there. But then Styria GP, Perez went from 17th and finished ahead of his teammate, as well as having like front wing damage in that race for the last lap and a bit.
Yeah.
That he was ahead of his teammate that much.
He is obviously against very experienced teammates. I know Nico hasn't trained. He hasn't had any. There was a funny radio message on after Hülkenberg had finished the race. He didn't know what mode to put the car in on switch off mode. He was like, "What buttons do I press? I don't understand what purple 14 means." I was like, so the knowledge wasn't there for Nico, but he's still a very experienced F1 driver.
Like it's still a very tough person to come up against, and I think Silverstone is one of Hulk's better tracks.
Yeah.
So it was still going to be tough for Lance Stroll because that Racing Point is such an easy car to drive, and he would have had the whole week this time. He would have had a proper kind of seat fitting, I imagine. He's got his helmet, properly. Little things he would have just felt comfortable. I imagine he's been on the simulator for countless hours all week this week, trying to understand the car a little bit better. So it's maybe there, but then you go, Lance, this is a big opportunity to prove yourself.
Yeah, to beat an experienced teammate, driver.
He's got the unlucky thing in Formula One where people don't just look at Lance Stroll, they look at Lawrence Stroll.
Yeah, they look at the money. How the journey Stroll has taken.
And it's a ridiculous thing to go a pay driver versus the talent. Well, realistically, Lance Stroll costs Racing Point more because the dad buys into the team, but he's putting... Lance himself isn't bringing any of that money.
Yeah.
But Checo is bringing 12 million a season, I'm pretty sure, in Telecel, I think it is. I'm not sure I got that sponsor right, but the telecommunications Mexican company. Perez and himself is a paid driver, with big sponsorship. So it's not that, but the Sebastian rumours won't go away. It does seem pretty much that Sebastian will be driving for Aston Martin next year. And that puts even more spotlight on Lance, because if you're going to go up against someone like Checo, or Checo loses a seat for you to stay in the team, you better be bloody good.
Yeah. Going to hope that Sebastian is still spinning to make you look good.
And a weekend when Perez wasn't able to compete, it was a chance really to kind of go, I'm Lance Stroll, I deserve to be in this Racing Point seat. And what he's done is gone, he hasn't driven awfully.
No, he's put P6 plus the rest. But
he's just gone, nah.
Yeah.
That's what you feel with it, if you're being honest.
Moving on to Ferrari. The red, what is it? The red stallions or whatever?
Yeah, I think they're stallions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Prancing horse.
As Ferrari, I don't even know where to start. It's a team with a terrible car, but it's a team of two halves. Everything. Charles, race pace is incredible. He's put the Ferrari in P4, just outside the podium positions. Great drive, undoubtedly. Could argue driver of the day. And then on the other half of the garage, all Ferrari, very positive for Charles. Other half of the garage, Sebastian Vettel spinning again. Bad strategy calls. Suspicious car failures. I just don't know what to say. It's a team of completely two halves. Charles is driving incredibly and everything's imploding around Sebastian Vettel.
I think Seb is at the case where it's an interesting debate. I know obviously Sebastian's a popular guy. He's a lovely human being, and on retrospect, I think a lot of us kind of thought, he was just a spoiled brat in his Red Bull days. But Seb's always been that kind of nicer guy. He was ferocious in Red Bull, but as he's matured, you kind of mellow in temper, and everything Seb does is done with a little bit of class.
Yeah, he's
within
F1
the sport
through and through.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it hard for people to see like this. I think we have to be honest and say, just looking at the bigger picture, and things like this. It isn't Ferrari's fault that Sebastian's not driving well. I mean, he clearly doesn't have confidence in the team, and it's been issues, but especially the last 3 years, they've really struggled with a car that just seems so fragile to kind of spin out. And Charles Leclerc definitely showed last year, especially with his pole lap in Singapore. Like, that was one of the scruffiest poles I've ever seen at Singapore, but Charles seemed to thrive on it. In terms of when it's twitching about all over the place, he can handle an unstable car, where Seb needs everything to kind of feel glued, that confidence that it will do when he turns into a corner. It's going to react how he wants it to react and how he expects it to react. And yeah, he's struggling massively with a crisis of confidence, and clearly has the mentality that he still wants to fight. But the Ferrari chapter is ending disastrously for the both of them, because it doesn't look good for Ferrari as well that a four-time world champion is, struggling to score points.
Yeah, they are criticising each other in the media. It's not good. No,
they are very kind of at ends, but enough appreciation can't go to what Charles is doing. Again, impressive first season with Ferrari. Now, in a struggling Ferrari, he's not going, what's going on, guys? He's knuckling down, he's getting on with the job. Like I say, an unstable Ferrari, Charles can probably handle a little bit better with his driving style. But still, the performance is incredible. To make a one-stop work in that race and jump both racing points, incredible from Charles.
We were thinking they were going to be behind McLaren and Renault, but they're ahead of Racing Point. Well, Charles Leclerc is ahead of Racing Point. Ferrari A team, the B team is still struggling. But yeah, it's a very positive weekend for Ferrari with the Charles Leclerc result, but also not positive. It's such a difficult team. But to talk about as a whole,
it's so sad. We said it with a bit like Verstappen celebrating a P2 earlier in the season, like it was a win.
Yeah.
It was so sad and disheartening to see Charles Leclerc, as much as it was an epic drive, to hear Charles Leclerc celebrate so
P4.
Yeah, P4. It's not even a podium. Just being like, yes, that is as good as we could have got today. Yeah. And he was pumped for it. And you're going, oh, that's sad.
But they've got to be realistic.
They have to.
They've got to be honest with themselves. And that's a mighty achievement for that team at the moment.
Absolutely. And now we move on to Red Bull. And obviously in recent weeks, we have been critical of Alex Albon's performances. And to clear things up, it's still not good enough, because he's qualifying too far back, which is then meaning that in the race he's having to do almost recovery drives from the start. But this drive was a much better, I think he needed it. He got into Q3 after being out in Q2 the last couple of races, so that was good that he managed to kind of find that level of performance. Then in the race, this is the overtaking you want to see from Alex, and he did it, learnt his lessons. He was kind of bold, he was aggressive in his overtakes, but also was respectful for how his car was working.
Exactly, yeah.
He didn't put it in a compromised position. And he was definitely the overtaker of the day in terms of, going around the outside of Copse and Stowe.
The 3 or 4 overtakes he did around the outside of Copse was unbelievable.
Yeah, the Kimi Raikkonen one was a really brilliant overtake.
Doing it flat out, 90-degree turn, and have all the control fighting another car. Unbelievable.
It was. And that is what you love to see from Alex. We've never doubted Alex's talent as a driver. We've doubted whether it's good enough for Red Bull at this stage. And realistically, his teammates won a race where Mercedes have kind of struggled. What Alex now needs this is a good stepping stone, but he still needs to find another level, and he needs to be pushing, because the Mercedes is out 3 out of the 5 races. That's over 50% of the races. Mercedes have had some sort of issue with their car. Race 1 in Austria, they had the gearbox issue. Albon wasn't able to take advantage of that for Red Bull. In race 4 in Silverstone, they had the issue with the tyres, with both drivers having tyre failures and punctures. It got worse this weekend, where the car was just so hard on its tyres and had no sort of... And a team that always traditionally have been very good at kind of building a car that looks after their tyres. The blistering that we were seeing and stuff, it was crazy to see Mercedes. So if Alex Albon's there and he can support Max, and basically Max is the one pushing Mercedes to the car outside of its comfort zone, but if Albon can be there and making sure that Mercedes can't have like a backup plan or an easier plan to like extra pit stops, to kind of charge at Max, if Alex can get to that position to stop that, then that is the job that Red Bull need him to do. And he's not quite there yet, but a performance like Sunday is a much positive thing. And we wanted to see him better, and it was better. But he still needs to find another level from that. And then Max Verstappen, I mean, the guy is on another level this season. Last season we saw a massive improvement in that kind of back end of the second half of the first half of the season in 2019, with great performance in Austria, great performance in Germany, Hungary as well, fighting Lewis Hamilton wheel to wheel, really strong performances and consistent. We're now seeing from Max a level above that. He is some way finding a way to get that Red Bull to compete with the Mercedes, and in times where, they're suffering, he's been able to eat into their advantage. Last week, he was in the window to take advantage of Valtteri Bottas, tyre failure, and to push on that front, and almost was close enough to get to Lewis Hamilton. This week, he was able to kind of, on his first stint, the team were telling him, look after their tyres. He was like, no, I can drive these tyres to push Mercedes all the way that they can't manage the tyres and get an extra maybe lap or two out of.
Push them out of their comfort zone.
He did, and it is incredible to watch. And we'll probably talk about it at the end of Mercedes, but being P2 in the championship against Mercedes that are so dominant, honestly, Max Verstappen is world title worthy material right now. And it's just so frustrating that the Red Bull car just isn't quite good enough, that it has to still rely on Mercedes having faults rather than matching Mercedes for pace. And if they could match Mercedes for pace at some circuits and then with the faults, then we would have had a serious kind of championship battle on our hands.
Yeah. At the moment it's 30 points, 5 races in. Some gap, but yeah. Is that all on Red Bull?
I think that's all I've got to say.
Just Albon making progress, Max on another level, to summarise.
Absolutely, that's literally it.
Well, Mercedes, I was probably very critical on them in their driver ratings, giving them a 6 and a 7 for Bottas and Lewis. But it was a poor day. You'd say any other team, P2 and P3, fantastic result. Mercedes, though, terrible result. In that car, they should be doing the invincible season and winning every race. Just was off and outpaced by Max Verstappen. Both of them struggled for tyre wear. I think Bottas more than Lewis. And it was tyre wear was their demise. They were either pushing too early, creating those blisters early, which then had the knock-on effect that tyre life didn't last as long. It just didn't sit right for them at the 70th anniversary and cost them the victory in the end. And obviously Bottas, the pole sitter, finishing behind his teammate because of a strategy call. When has that happened in the Mercedes garage? Understandably, Bottas wasn't too happy. I think he called the strategist sleeping at Mercedes, Toto basically just said, "Nope, we were just outpaced by Red Bull." Take it how it is. But yeah, not a good day for Mercedes. Tyre wear was the bane of their life at the 70th anniversary race.
Yeah, and this is what we're saying. You know, obviously, the Mercedes car is clearly very quick. If we're just talking about out-and-out pace, this car's incredible. But I don't know whether in the fact that their pursuit for speed and out-and-out dominance pace-wise has put undue pressure on things, and obviously having a unprecedented start to the season, getting to here, being on a very kind of car killer track, shall we say, in terms of Austria, very difficult, and then a very tyre aggressive track in Silverstone. You know, issues that may have been solved earlier in the season that they might have flagged up in earlier races like Mercedes have been able to do. You know, they're experiencing issues. And I made the comparison, I think, on Twitter in a response to someone I said that don't rule out Max Verstappen out the championship yet. So on the face of things, that sounds absolutely ridiculous because Mercedes clearly have the best car on the grid. And I don't think anyone's arguing that. I don't think that's a struggle. But in 2005, McLaren had clearly the best car. It was quicker than everything. Kimi Raikkonen was, the gun driver. He was flying. He was having a great time. But reliability let them down and allowed Fernando Alonso in the more reliable Renault, obviously an incredible driver in himself, to win his first world title and, take advantage of those losses. With Max Verstappen so far, obviously, what would have been really interesting is if he finished that first race. DNFing the first race, it has put them behind a little bit in that slip. But since then, he's been P3, P2, P2, P1.
Not bad record.
He's overachieved in 3 out of those 4 races that he's finished.
Yeah.
Because anything above third is overachieving what his car should be doing. And he's 30 points behind Lewis in the championship. But they're having issues. We're going to tracks like Mugello. We've never driven F1 there before. Imola, we haven't driven there since I think about 2006. And Kimi Raikkonen is the only driver on the grid who's ever driven there before. So, they don't have this knowledge there. Portimao, first time we've ever going to kind of that Portuguese track. From their Nürburgring, we haven't been there for years. Obviously, Lewis has driven there and has that advantage. But, I don't even think it was on the grid when Mercedes were in. So I'm not sure if they have any data to kind of look back on in that front. So what I'm saying is there's unknowns. In theory, you would say that Mercedes have a car that should suit all these tracks. But they're coming up against issues. And Mercedes are a very good team in doing it, but everything's accelerated on a scale. We've got triple headers, we've got a week's break, then we've got another triple header, and I don't know if they're triple headers after this, after that in terms of, but by that stage it's going there. It's going to be similar sort of temperatures in Spain next week. If Max can find a way to win in Spain next week, then you go, it's very unlikely. It's very out of the question. But do not rule out Red Bull, especially as they have a very clear, Bottas might not be playing ball. He's probably getting to that stage where he's fed up playing second fiddle.
Yeah.
There might be a little bit of issues in that team harmony from that front. But what do you think of the crazy theory, Steve?
Dare to dream. Every season you want to see a title fight. Bottas ain't going to bring it. So you just got to hope Red Bull and Verstappen put it together. As you say, reliable versus speed. Maybe they can try to close the gap of speed during the season, as they always do. And nick results here and there and put together a challenge. Hope for some reliability issues to force a retirement here and there from Lewis. Bam, we got a title fight. We got competitive season
between two different drivers that may even go all the way. It may
be so far out there, but we just want to cling on to something. And it's not impossible. It is possible, though points is big, but
we've only had 5 races, and Mercedes have looked the best car.
Yeah.
But they haven't. They've almost done it, but they haven't fully capitalised on that, and they've also experienced issues. And it could have been worse in Austria race 1 if Alex Albon had found a way to win.
Yeah.
And that would have been points taken away from that. In hindsight, that may be a pivotal moment in terms of, I'm not sure how things go. But don't write off this F1 season as being boring just yet, especially in 2020, how things have been thrown up in the air with everything. Stranger things have happened within Formula 1, and Max's level of performances has to ask questions. In terms of that. But that, guys, is the review of the race for each teams individually. We now move on to the kind of feeder review of the weekend. Obviously, as usual, we have 2 F2 and 2 F3 races. The feature races in F3 and F2 were both won by the pole sitters. Logan Sargent got pole and converted to a dominant victory in the F3, and also in the F2, Callum Ilott did the same, gained pole position and took his feature race win for the season. And Callum Ilott being massively impressive. Obviously, the talk of the Ferrari Juniors pre-season was all around the Prema boys in Mick Schumacher and Robert Schwartzman. But Callum Ilott is very much sticking his hand into the mix and going, you know what, I'm a good driver, I'm in a good team, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get the results that you have to pay attention to me, and I want to be in F1, which you have to do in kind of junior categories. And what he's doing so far this season is very impressive. Now, sticking with Prema with the F2 sprint race, it should have realistically been a Prema 1-2 with Robert Schwartzman starting on reverse grid pole and Mick Schumacher starting 2. It was them two fighting for the duration of the race. Mick made mistakes twice in following Robert Schwartzman, but managed to catch the lead. Tyres were better come the end of the race. Went down the Wellington Straight, was going to go round the outside into Brooklands, thought he'd made the move, but he turned in aggressively too early, taking out his teammate's front wing, and Robert then finished outside of the points. Mick was able to kind of get round. Luckily, didn't receive a puncture for him, getting P2. And Tsunoda got his first ever victory in F2. The young Japanese driver, obviously affiliated with Honda and Red Bull. Honda, we know, desperate for a Japanese driver to go in, and Marco gave him what I thought was a pretty unrealistic target of 4th in the championship this season in F2. The lad's not doing bad. He kind of hung about in 3rd place, was the only guys who could stick with the Prema's pace, and was able to take advantage when the two Premas came together. So it was impressive from him. On Mick, I think he's a humble, he's a nice lad. I don't think there was any kind of aggressive intent in it. He's made a mistake, he's got things wrong. But unfortunately, that's where Mick Schumacher probably has been this season. He's had a little bit of poor luck, but then there's also been some poor decision making on his front as well. And in a season where Callum Ilott's doing so well, where Robert Schwartzman to date has had a good introduction into F2. Obviously, Silverstone, both rounds didn't suit Schwartzman in F2. This year he has struggled. Be interesting to see how he bounces back from that in the championship. But yeah, Mick needs to pull it all together. But in F3 was probably the action of the weekend. Liram Zendelli taking the lead and led every lap apart from the last half of the lap of the race, where Bent Fiskow was the only driver who could stick with him. And it was probably the racing action of the entire weekend in F3, F2 and F1 in terms of wheel-to-wheel action.
And last lap.
Last lap.
For the lead.
It's what more dramatic could you get? He got the better exit out of Brooklands and I think took him going out of Copse and through the Maggots and Beckett's complex. Then Liam Zendelli had DRS and they fought through Stowe, and then it looked like Zendelli had been able to get it back through Vale, but no, went a little bit wide. Bent Viscal was very patient, got the better traction on the outside, drag kind of race to the end, and Bent Viscal claims his first victory in F3 after obviously in Hungary had that amazing performance in the rain, but having suffered a 10-second penalty post-race, finished in 6th in the end, I think, in that race, which was, really frustrating for the young Dutch driver. But a very good performance from Bent this weekend, and yeah, it was incredible racing action, wasn't it?
Yeah, for the last lap, for the lead, it's what you want.
It absolutely is, and again, highly recommend you to kind of watch the F3 and F2. These are the stars of tomorrow, and really good to kind of watch. And the performer of the weekend for me had to be Callum Ilott. Really dominant performance in his F2 feature race, and still scored strong performance. Robert Schwartzman, I believe, was still leading the championship going into this weekend, and Callum Ilott now leads the Formula 2 championship.
Yeah, I think Lundgaard also had a very good weekend as well, because he's now 2nd in the championship.
He had a good feature race.
Because he finished on the podium.
But he, he finished the podium. Jack Aitken, I think, actually has to be there. Campos have struggled this season. And
double podium finish.
Double podium for Jack Aitken was very impressive, actually. 2 third-place finishes. So well done, Jack, the kind of Williams Academy driver. But yeah, Lundgaard really struggled with tyres all weekend, and the second race in particular, I think it dropped him outside of the points.
Okay.
So yeah, he really dropped off in terms of that. He was not a happy boy on radio. But there's your feeder roundup. Now we move on to the driver of the day. And for me, there's only one candidate, but I'll see what you go for, Stephen.
I think there's 2, but I'm going for Max Verstappen. I mentioned Leclerc was a contender, but for me, Max to win, beating the Mercedes first time this season, unbelievable time management, great pace, was untouchable. For Toto to say they were quicker than us is quite an achievement for Red Bull and Max Verstappen.
Absolutely, for the advantage that Mercedes has had all year and all in qualifying, Red Bull have just gone, screw it, we can't match them in qualifying, so we've got to try and out-strategy them in the race, and that is exactly what they did, and it was confusing that Mercedes didn't do it. It's the second time. They got away with it in race 1 because Max Verstappen obviously retired with that engine issue, but it's the second time they've done it now and taken advantage of the situation. And
maybe there's a bit of arrogance from the Mercedes team there.
Maybe, it's they probably do need to take Red Bull seriously, and when they start doing that, you probably imagine Mercedes to kind of be able to see it home.
Yeah.
But that maybe they got a little bit complacent with how far Red Bull were back, and Max's performances are driving them. But Max, driver of the day, to beat the Mercedes in the fashion that he did, incredible. Making jokes at the start of the last lap because he was that comfortable.
Yeah.
Sums it up, and it's brilliant to see, and it's brilliant to see someone taking the charge to Mercedes, and that is by sheer force of will, I think, from Max Verstappen. But Charles Leclerc was fantastic again for Ferrari. Really impressive from him as well. Race rating.
Race rating. I gave it a 7 last week. You gave it a 6 last week.
Slept down.
This week, it gripped me throughout. There were lots of obviously 2-stop strategies, 3 stops for some people. It was very difficult to keep track of who was where. Are they there on race pace? Are they there because they got a pit stop in hand? It had me gripped throughout. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
I agree. I think it was the second best race of the season.
Yeah.
In terms of that, for kind of consistent action throughout, and obviously races always get better if there is challenge throughout the field, and F1 has been brilliant for the challenges throughout the field all season, but what we have missed is battles for the lead. It's either been Lewis dominating it or Valtteri Bottas got the benefit of team orders helping him because they had the gearbox issues in Austria. This is the only race where we've had kind of a challenge for the lead and seen Mercedes buckle under a little bit of pressure. So that was good. So 8 out of 10 for me as well. It was a really enjoyable race. I think gripped is a good word. I certainly was gripped by the action. Really fascinating on that. But that, guys, is the end of the Race Review podcast. We hope you have enjoyed it. It's always good taking a deeper look at things after the race, kind of looking at each individual team's weekends and how they're progressing. Key themes to talk about through this season now that we've got 5 under our belt as well. We can start having conversations a bit like Lance Stroll, Carlos Sainz, seeing the bigger picture of things. Certainly on that aspect from there. But yeah, it's enjoyable as always, and don't forget to let us know in the comments down below your thoughts on the race. Who was your driver of the day? Race rating. What did you think of the feeder performances throughout? If you watched those as well, it would be fascinating to hear. But if you're new around here, or you haven't done so already, Stephen,
you can like, you can subscribe, and you can ding that bell.
Ding that bell. But that's it from us today, guys. So for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.